Good morning. Sorry to have kept you waiting. I'm Bill Tiller, and I have been asked to stand in for one good friend, Bob Jeffries, in order to introduce to you another good friend, George Meek. I'm a professor at Stanford University, and although I have a long-standing avocational interest in the field of study George will disclose to you today, I know very little about the technical details and only learned yesterday of the actual discoveries to be revealed by George and his associates. Now, although one could say that this type of data might be faked, my 12 years of experience with George indicates a man of extremely high integrity and commitment to truth. As an engineering graduate of the University of Michigan in 1932, George became a specialist in the field of thermodynamics. He designed air conditioning devices for the Pentagon building in 1940, and as a collaborator of Willis Carrier, developed air conditioning installed in a high percentage of the post-war multi-story buildings in Washington. He was a technical advisor to Averell Harriman in London in World War II. After the war, he conducted his own consulting engineering business. In the 18 years before he retired, Swedish industrialists and a banking firm paid him to make 46 trips to Europe to help supervise their research laboratory. During this period, his own inventions were patented in many countries, including one in the USSR. In 1970, George left his highly successful professional career to spend the remainder of his life in research into the basic nature of man. For this purpose, he has traveled all over the world and built up a network of perhaps 36 colleagues in many sciences, psychiatry, psychology, parapsychology, medicine, and religion. He and his wife, Jeanette, operate a research facility in Franklin, North Carolina, under the name Metascience Foundation. They hire consultants as needed rather than building up a permanent staff. George has published several books on his research as listed in the press packet that you have. These are now being translated into other languages. And now, 12 years into his self-directed research, he is ready to announce a major breakthrough. It is my pleasure to present to you George Meek.
Thank you, Bill. Good morning. Thanks for coming out. We have chosen Easter week to make this announcement for reasons that will shortly become apparent. For many Christians, our findings may be one of the most significant items of news in 2,000 years. The findings I am announcing today are truly fantastic and far out, but I can assure you that they are pure science, not science fiction. After 10 years of research in this particular field, Metascience Foundation is pleased to report 2 historic accomplishments. For the first time, we have electronic proof that the mind, memory banks, and personality survive death of the physical body. Our proof consists of many hours of conversations with some among the so-called dead. Second, an elementary, and I stress the word elementary, an elementary start has been made toward the perfection of a communication system that should someday permit those living on Earth to talk with persons very much alive on higher levels of consciousness. The system will use electromagnetic and etheric energies, and it should carry telephone-like conversations, and perhaps someday provide video transmissions. We call our equipment Spiricom, short for Spirit Communication. It is fully described with photographs and wiring diagrams in the technical manual, which is in your press kit. To achieve the results reported today, we combined electronic technology with certain unusual psychic, or as we prefer to call them, etheric energies, such as those used by our research associate, William O'Neill, who is sitting here on my left. At the present time, Bill is the only member of our team who possesses such energies to the required degree to get the quality of conversation that you will be hearing this morning. Let me now play for you one of the excerpts from our conversations with the so-called dead, which is on the cassette, which was in your press kit. It's an hour-and-a-half recording of the history and development of this, and I think it contains some 17 excerpts. In this one, in the first excerpt, our researcher, Bill, is talking to Dr. George Jeffries Mueller, an American physicist who died of a heart attack in 1967. But in 1980 and 81, Dr. Mueller worked with us from his present realm to help us develop the equipment that made this recording possible. You will hear a very loud and to you objectionable background sound. At this early stage of our work, that sound, caused by a necessary mixture of 13 audio frequencies, was unavoidable. Prior to this excerpt, Dr. Mueller and Bill have been discussing their joint video research, which we hope will someday accompany audio communication. In this excerpt, Dr. Mueller is giving specific technical instructions to William. As I said, you will hear a very loud and objectionable background sound, which at this early stage is necessary. These recordings involve 13 special audio frequencies. And prior to this excerpt, they had been discussing their video research. And in this excerpt, Dr. Mueller is giving specific technical instructions to William. All right.
Just a minute, Doctor. Yes, I know you're here, but I'm going to cut down the volume of these other frequencies. Very well, William. I want to cut them down to a level that won't...
Dr. Mueller was in pinpointing the problem regarding the experimental video device which he and William were working on. He said near the third transistor in the preamp unit, there is an impedance mismatch, which can be corrected by using a 150 ohm half-watt resistor with a .0047 ceramic microfarad capacitor. What better proof could there be that Dr. Mueller's mind, memory banks, personality are still alive and functioning in a useful and dramatic way? Is this really two-way voice communication with a scientist who had his funeral almost 15 years ago? Preposterous, you will say. Well, now you can sense my disbelief, which I experienced almost 60 years ago, when with a piece of galena crystal and a small wire called a cat's whisker, I could just barely detect in my earphones the call letters of one of the first radio stations in this country. Now I want to share with you another taped voice, some 2 minutes of a much longer conversation from the cassette in the press kit. A man who calls himself Fred Ingstrom says he died in 1830 in a rural area of Maryland. Records of that area during that time are scanty, so we've not been able to prove that Fred lived and died when he said he did. With Dr. Mueller, on the other hand, we have been able to verify all the facts of his life that he has told us about. We know that he is who he says he is, or should I say, he was who he says he was. You have his resume.
Let's see, I'll make a change here. Now say something. I'll give you a count of 5. You sound more like a robot. I doubt that very much. I'm going to change it back again. Now give me a count of 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Again. Wait a minute. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, I heard you. Wait a minute. Okay, sweetheart. What did you say? I was talking to my wife. Oh, that's right. You said you were married, oh boy. Okay. Oh boy. I'm glad you have a sense of humor. Well, if you can hear me, you'll be able to hear that, because I'll make a tape of it, okay? Okay, yeah, oh boy, that'll be fine. Oh boy, that's right, you mentioned that. You said you were married. How long have you been married, Bill? About 8 years. Oh, well, I never did ask you how old you are. How old are you, Bill? I'm 63. Oh boy, yeah, I thought you were maybe in your 20s. Sound like you're in your 20s. Well, mentally, I feel like I'm in my 20s, but when I shave, my mirror says, "Who are you fooling, old man?" Yeah, I know what you mean.
As the months wore on, we reduced the level of the background sounds. The communicator's voice became more natural. As you will note in this next sample, here Dr. Mueller, our friend, is inquiring about a small book he said he had written for the U.S. Army in 1947. He had earlier suggested that we locate a copy and read pages 66 and 67.
Yes, sir.
Did you appear in that journal line yet?
Oh, that book of yours? No, sir. By the way, our friend, Mr. Meek, is really going all out to find that, because I want to read those 2 pages you mentioned, sir.
Very well, and I want you to read them, will you? There must be copies available somewhere.
Well, I think, George, it's Mr. Meek, our friend.
Your friend?
Yes. Even if he has to go to the Library of Congress, he'll probably do that.
Oh, I see. All right. Well, very well.
The pages he referred to were prophetic with respect to the electronic achievement which we are announcing today. There's a copy of those 2 pages in the back of your press packet. To the skeptics and doubters in the scientific community, and we know there will be many, because our findings are so far out in terms of conventional scientific wisdom, we issue this simple challenge. First, obtain our 1.5-hour recording, which includes 14 excerpts from many hours of conversation with Dr. Mueller. Then study our 100-page technical manual entitled Spiricom, which describes the present equipment in full detail and gives suggestions for research by others. Then conduct your own research and publish your findings. As a methodical and skeptical engineer, I have subjected our findings to every conceivable test, and I am convinced that they are valid and will withstand the closest possible scrutiny by the scientific community. After building almost half a century, building a reputation internationally for integrity in research and engineering, I am not about to perpetrate any hoax. In this instance, it would be a cruel and senseless hoax indeed. The Metascience Foundation seeks no profit from the use others will make of our research. The whole purpose of our releasing these findings today is to encourage the widest possible research to someday perfect Spiricom. We have filed no patents. The really great inventions still lie ahead, and most probably will be made by other inventors. In recent weeks, I have circled the globe to arrange for dissemination of our findings in Britain, Germany, France, Switzerland, Italy, and Sweden, and in South Africa, India, Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, Philippines, and Japan. We want the whole world to know that there is electronic proof that death is not the end of life. The dead are still very much alive. After your funeral, your mind, memory banks, and personality will be as much alive as those of Dr. George Jeffries Mueller. This accomplishment is as incredible and revolutionary as the first powered flight by the Wright brothers, which took place about 2 months after the New York Times predicted in an editorial that man would not fly for 1 million to 10 million years. Like those of the Wright brothers, our first efforts are primitive, and our progress is uneven. Our Spiricom equipment does not work every day, and right now we are temporarily out of communication. We are not discouraged, far from it. We are tremendously encouraged by the beginning which we have made and which we are today sharing with people all over the world. A skeptical world finally realized that the bicycle mechanics of Kitty Hawk, whose first flight lasted all of 12 seconds and went 160 feet, had ushered in a new age of exploration of outer space. We believe that the research findings announced here today will open up whole new worlds of inner space. The mapping of those worlds may be one of the most significant developments in human evolution.
I speak for a group of 6 men who've worked on this projects, who collectively have spent more than 183 years in electronics. We have logged 43 man-years on Spiricom type research. Every one of us will stake our reputation on the validity of the communications with Dr. Mueller.
It's a great pleasure to me to come here and know about these things. I am one of more than 1,000 German persons engaged in communication experiments with the so-called dead. And I tell you frankly, to my best knowledge, there's none of them who succeeded in accomplishing this type of two-way communication which has been produced here by the help of Dr. Mueller.
Thank you, Ernst. Now, we were glad to try to answer your questions.
Why Dr.
The gentleman in the
Mueller?
back there. All right, go ahead.
Why Dr. Mueller?
We don't really know. All we can say at this time in answer to you, until you have absorbed the information that is in this pamphlet and on this chart, all we can say to you that his etheric energy was more akin to Bill's than he would have been to other people. But you will find a far better answer to that question in the printed materials and in the technical manual. Yes, sir?
Mr. Meek, as you yourself said, you expect skepticism before a sophisticated journalistic audience here. And you said you expect to be considered far out of this. Why should we accept what seems to be scientifically a pocketbook story? Forgive the hardness there.
No.
Let's put it over here.
The gentleman asked why we should expect any of you people to accept a cock and bull story. Frankly, we don't expect you to accept this story. All we are asking today, all we're attempting to do in this press conference, is to ask you to perform your function of reporting this information, reporting this news to your readers, listeners, and viewers. Then I assure you that in the months ahead, this tape will be exhaustively analyzed in the laboratories of such companies as, well, the Bell Laboratories, IT&T, RCA, IBM, Sony, Hitachi, Panasonic, Philips, Telefunken. The scientists and engineers in those laboratories will go into this tape exhaustively. Not until some months hence, when they give some indication of their findings, will you have any basis for accepting this information. Sir?
It's customary for a scientific publication to undergo what's called peer review before it's brought out. Then after that, it is subjected to efforts to replicate the work done and so forth. Was there peer review done on this before? Who peer reviewed it, and what were their comments?
There was no peer review. The only peers involved in this are those scientists with whom I have come in contact around the world who are what I will call at the cutting edge of research into energies that fall outside of the four known energies of science. When Morse and Bell and Marconi made their tremendous contributions to mankind, they did not first go and seek out what might have been called the scientists of those days. In that connection, I was very interested when I saw that they put this little device up here. One of the facsimile of the early telegraph device. At the time, Bell and Morse were working on their equipment and making use of electromagnetic energies. They didn't know really anything about electricity. And at that time, in fact, for 50 years later, no scientist had more than a foggy idea of what electricity really was. We are in that position today with respect to etheric energies. Some of the scientists who have been exploring in this area, such as Professor Tiller, Professor Senkowski, Professor Dr. Alfred Stelter, one of my colleagues, Professor of Nuclear Chemistry and Paraphysics at Dortmund University in Germany. Professor Alex Schneider, a respected physicist in Switzerland and head of the Swiss Parapsychology Association, and other men of that type with whom I'm working with are scientists who are pioneering this new area, new energy, which science will learn more and more about as the years go on. But it is for that reason that the only peers that are involved in evaluating this are those who know something beyond what is in the present books, physics books, about the four basic energies. And just one other little aside there, I don't want to give a lecture on this subject, but this is, you brought up an extremely important point. You may remember that physics itself has been undergoing absolutely profound changes in recent years. Arthur Koestler put it very well when he said that most good physics laboratories have a sign on their door, closed for repairs. Yes?
Mr. Meek, you said you were not perpetrating the hoax, but if no independent scientist has observed your experiments, how can you be certain someone is not playing a hoax on you?
I have complete trust in the colleagues that I have built up over the years. And that's why I had Mr. Cerny speak and point out that my electronic colleagues have spent quite some decades in research with all and design, building, use of all types of electronic equipment. Yes, sir?
Yes, sir. Was it impossible to have some kind of a demonstration today of this?
Yes, as I said in my talk, the equipment at this moment is not operable. We're in the process of designing completely new equipment, which we hope to have operable in a few months. You, sir, are, if I may say so, in the same position as a news representative in the spring of 1904. I referred to the work of the Wright brothers. They had their flight, their short flight in December, early December, and the plane crashed. That was the end of it for the moment. And a reporter in the spring of 1904 said, "When can we see you fly again?" All they could do was give you the same answer I am giving you now. Sometime in the months ahead, when we have our new airplane, our new equipment, we will welcome public demonstration.
Has the press seen it at all, in public at all, or just among your peers?
This has been kept totally within our own group. Our group, as I said, is worldwide. It was a simple matter for me on this trip around the world to meet with my colleagues in these various countries, Dr. Hiroshi Nodiyama.
Why did you pick this forum rather than having the press come to your laboratory and see you call forth one of these spirits?
Well, we're not in the process of calling forth spirits. It is hard for you to realize that we are still in this very, very early stage. I told you at the beginning that our equipment is very elementary. And one of the whole purposes of going ahead and making a release now is to encourage researchers all over the world to get into this work. Dr. Senkowski, for instance, came up with a valuable suggestion the other night. He himself has been a radio amateur since he was 15 years old. There are today 50,000 hams, as we call them, in Germany alone. We will encourage all of those hams to get into this research. We have a feeling that by going ahead now and announcing this work and sharing our results with like-minded investigators around the world, that we will greatly speed up this development.
Mr. Meek, you had these conversations in 1980 and 81. Why did you wait until now to make the announcement, or did you just answer that?
Basically, there were two reasons. One, we were doing some additional checking in the month of December and early January, and it's taken us the last 90 days to pull together our material and get it in printed form so it could be distributed on this trip around the world.
Mr. Meek,
Sir,
on this Fred Ingstrom cut, I'm a little curious. I need some clarification. You said that it had to be explained to him what a tape recorder was, apparently because tape recorders hadn't been invented in 1830.
Correct.
And I gather from that that people don't carry over the ability to learn current events, but they take their body of knowledge with them into this other world, so to speak. So I am wondering why it was so clear to Fred Ingstrom what a robot was when the word robot wasn't even invented until the early 20th century.
Very good. He and Bill had discussed that subject.
That had been discussed.
That had been discussed, yes, sir. But you have touched on a very important point. And I won't get off into a lecture on this, but we have learned that when each of us someday goes over, we do not suddenly get all wise, and depending on where we land in the various levels of consciousness, and again, you won't understand that term until you get into some of our printed material, depending on where you land in various levels of consciousness, your learning will progress, but at a rate depending on the particular level in which you reside.
Have you asked these folks where they are and what it's like? And how many of them have you?
Yes, with Dr. Mueller, one of the most humorous things, one of the books that you'll see in the press there, in the list that I published about 2 years ago, was a book called After We Die, What Then? And in the back of the book, I had an earlier version of this chart. And one day, Bill opened up the book and laid it out in front of Dr. Mueller, and Dr. Mueller studied it, and he said, that thing amazed us, he said he couldn't quite figure out where he was. And the reason was that he had a level of comprehension which was down here in the, what we call the lowest astral planes. And as the months wore on, it was very easy for us, with the background we have, to see that he was getting an enlightenment. Here he'd been over there for, 14, 15 years. But only during the time that he was working with us was he beginning to get enough enlightenment to be able to move on up. And science has learned that everything in the universe is energy, vibration. And that applies to these levels of consciousness. And if you just visualize receiving a set for tuning, if we want to tune into these levels, we have to go up to higher and higher frequencies. And as the months wore on, Dr. Mueller, we could tell, was moving up in frequency. And that's what he actually happened. As about the 1st of December last year, he moved out of range of the equipment that we then had. I mentioned that our ongoing research, we have now 3 totally new systems, all of which will go far beyond the work that William and I have been doing, and which have an opportunity of tuning into higher levels of consciousness. We've got 3 separate projects set up in various parts of the world to explore simultaneously these additional approaches to communication. Dr. Senskowski is carrying on one of these projects in England, where we were using, in Germany, where we will be using electrically activated quartz crystals and either laser light or ultraviolet as a means of being able to work at these higher levels of consciousness.
What's in this for you, financially and
that's a good question. What is in it for me? To answer that question, I have to face the issue squarely and say that I am a visionary. And since this is so crucial in answering this question, which obviously would come up in a situation like this, I've taken the trouble to set down my vision. So bear with me a moment while I read and give you precisely my vision. Within perhaps 50 years, which is just an instant of time in the march of civilization, other inventors will have perfected the communication system. Then, billions of people on planet Earth will each know A, that death is merely the door to a new life, and B, that the quality of that life will depend on how well they master and live this life. The result will be nothing less than an evolutionary leap for mankind. There will be no more war, murder, or suicide. That is the legacy I want to leave my children and grandchildren and yours. That is what my wife and I have purchased with hundreds of thousands of dollars we would otherwise be leaving to our offspring. So that's what's in it for me.
Dr. Meek, let's get away from any kind of confrontational thing, because you're not going to prove to those who don't want to be convinced or anything, but just tell us this. What do you think, on the basis of your researches, is going to happen to you when you die and go over?
That answer, as well as the answer as to what's going to happen to you.
I'm not interested in what's going to happen to you. What do you think? You're the one who's done the research. What do you think is going to happen to you?
Well, I will give you a quickie answer.
That's all.
But you will be able to get a much more detailed answer if you will take the time to read this simple 32-page booklet, which we've illustrated so that it's readily comprehensible.
Okay, but I want a response out of your mind.
All right, out of my mind, best that I can tell you is that for 2 or 3 days after I die, I will be in a period of adjustment. Assuming I die normal death, there's been nothing traumatic, it will be a rather simple adjustment. And in a matter of a few days, I will be living wide awake and full of pep, free of any pain, any discomfort that I might have had at the time I made the transition. And I will be living probably in the levels of consciousness that are about the middle of this chart.
Why do you base it there? Mr. What's-his-name here was at a lower level.
At a lower level.
Why would you be at a higher level?
Because Mr. Mueller, I said a moment ago, well, I'll go back. I don't want to bring religion into this thing, but all of us know that in one of Jesus' teachings, he said that as you sow, so shall you reap. In Dr. Mueller's life, there were some situations that he was not completely proud of. And it took a period of time to, I won't say atone for those things, but to learn about it and get a perspective of it. That was what he was doing at a period of time, getting his perspective and moving up. And on one tape, which is in your cassette there, Dr. Mueller and William are discussing possibility of serious surgery on William. And he at one point says, well, if something happens to you, William, you're fortunate. You've had this experience. You know what you're going to run into on the other side. He said, in my case, I didn't know what was coming up. And it was, in my particular case, he said it was pretty much like waking up in a bad dream.
Well, to go on then from your arrival at this orange plane, then what happens?
Oh, sir, you're getting into areas way beyond the subject of this press conference. I have tried to provide the answers to that and related questions in this printed material. And in that connection, I'm going to make a seemingly presumptuous statement. If any of you will fully comprehend the information, study and comprehend the information that's in your packet, you will then know more about life after death than has been known by 90% of all of the scientists, psychiatrists, psychologists, ministers, priests, and rabbis who have ever lived. A very presumptuous statement, but you try it out. Yes?
I mean, I don't presume to know about the afterlife. What kind of response have you had from the religious community, if any, particularly from religious leaders who don't believe in an afterlife?
Just as we have not sought the opinions of established scientists, we have not sought the opinions of the religious hierarchies, radio ministers, and so forth. But on the score of religion, something very important has happened. When I published the book, After We Die, What Then?, it was most gratifying to see that that transcended all religions. When I came through Bombay, India, about 2.5 weeks ago, they showed me the translations that they were making of portions of that book into 5 different local languages in India, because it just confirmed, they felt perfectly, the writings in the ancient Veda and some of their other historical. In the case of of Japan, Dr. Moriyama, my scientist colleague there, had just finished having a book translated into Japanese, because he felt that this was of tremendous interest to the Shintoists and Buddhists who make up the 100 million population of Japan. In Brazil, this material about life after death is being translated into Portuguese to be offered to approximately 100 million Catholics. So I can say that our findings confirm all of the central core teaching of the world's great religions.
I don't think I got an answer to my question. Where physically are these spirits? Where in the universe are they? And I have a few other questions. Do they know each other? Do they communicate? Do they meet?
Let's take one at a time. This gentleman asked, where are these spirits? Again, there isn't any quick glib answer on that. You have to have certain background information, which you will get in here. And we have explained how it is easy to visualize these levels of being as being merely stacked up on the above the surface of the earth. Here we live, do our daily work. We're in at two different levels. And we speaking again about the young lady's question on religion. 2,000 years ago, the Apostle Paul says that man has a physical body and a spiritual body, and we have found that that is true, and that we are living in both bodies at the same time, and it is only the physical body that drops away and decays. The spiritual body moves on up at these other levels. But for practical purposes, just figure them stacked up. But we say that that's the simplistic way to do it. That we've got some explanatory material on that subject on the back of this, that actually these zones are all interwoven, because one of the things that physics has come up with that we now understand is that nothing in the universe is solid. This table is 99.99% empty space, and all of these zones, regions, levels actually can interpenetrate. That's why it makes it easy for us. We don't have to communicate with Dr. Mueller out on cloud 9 someplace. He is right in this vicinity.
George?
Yes, Bill?
Make it clear that it's not a distant space.
Yeah.
Because I think that's the picture that they're getting, and it's a wrong picture. It's better to talk in terms of a frequency space or some other...
Yes. Dr. Tiller makes a tremendously important point when you think about space. We must think in terms of life as energies, and these energies are not off in space. Don't think of them as space, but these are interpenetrating energies. And you just think of your radio being able to tune up and down the dial to these various frequencies. And we point out in that connection along this diagram that over here, matter, energy at progressively higher rates of vibration and frequencies. So, as you know, through this room at this moment, there are hundreds of radio signals, audio signals of all kinds, at different wavelengths. But you can separate them out if you have the proper tuning equipment. And in essence, that's what we've been doing for these years, trying to find how man on this plane can tune in to these other frequencies, because they're all right here, just like the sounds going through this room. Yes, sir.
Can you give us some idea who financed this project for all these years? Then I have a couple questions.
All right. First, on the financing. In my vision, I said that that is what I have my wife and I have purchased with the hundreds of thousands of dollars we otherwise would be leaving to our offspring. There has been many hundreds of thousands of dollars. That all came from me as a result of my wife's efforts and mine, earning money like you and paying taxes on it, and that would have been our estate that we would be leaving to our children. But we chose 12 years ago to spend the remaining years of our lives in working in projects of this type. And I knew, as an inventor and as a respected businessman on 2 continents, that once I went into this work, there would never again be any financial connection with the banking fraternities and the others that I had worked with. So it had to be a self-financed job, without any grants from the government, without any grants from...
Can you give us some idea how much you spent other than hundreds of thousands, or where you...
Well, it's hard to separate this out from some parallel projects that we have, but it's certainly far beyond $500,000.
Did you invent this solely?
Did I invent this? No, sir. The invention is really the work of 3 men. As you will learn on the tape, before we were in touch with Dr. Mueller, we were in touch with a deceased medical doctor who had been a ham radio operator. Remember my mentioning Dr. Sentkowski in that connection. Bill has been a ham radio operator all his life. We were in touch with a deceased medical doctor who, in collaboration with Bill, gave us our first breakthrough on September 27, 1977. And Doc Nick was the first to introduce the idea of using these supplementary audio tones. Then when Dr. Mueller came into the picture, he used his superb knowledge as an experimental physicist. He got his PhD from Cornell in experimental physics, and had this lifelong knowledge of electronics. He had been a key figure in the development of our missile program. He had a lifelong interest in the theory of music or sound. So working with Bill, he helped us refine much of our thinking about the sound energies against which he needed to, say, bounce his voice in order to make his voice appear in the audible in the space. If you had been present when any of these experiments were working, you would have heard Dr. Mueller's voice just out in space, just as it was picked up by the tape recorder. Does that answer your question, sir?
Are your children believers or skeptics? How do they feel about being...
Well, frankly, they thought the old man was nuts. 12 years ago, when he threw over a highly successful professional career. Now the situation is quite different. 2 of them are definitely, as you said, the believers. One who is an business executive in one of our biggest corporations, is not quite as far along, but it is, to me, it's been very gratifying to see how the 3 sons have come along, and actually it's partly, the acceptance is partly because they have seen the effects of this type of thinking in their own life. And the same thing on the healing. I mentioned some of the other work we've done. One of the things my colleagues and I have done is to sum up our findings in our studies on the subject of health and illness and the role of the mind in health and illness. We summed it up a few years ago in a book called Healers and the Healing Process. And my sons have been able to see the practical value of that knowledge. And that knowledge has very definite relationship to understanding their basic nature. the basic nature of man. That sounds like a very presumptuous title to say that we are studying, we're researching in the basic nature of man, but that is actually what we're doing. And what we did in this book, it came out a few years ago, Healers and Healing Process, we have provided a rather comfortable theoretical basis for understanding this tremendous explosion that is now taking place in holistic medicine. The basic, whole basic concept of what is going on in holistic medicine is comfortably explained in this chart, which was taken from the healing book, titled A Challenging New Concept of the Nature of Man from the Viewpoint of Late 20th Century Science and Scientific Mysticism. And credit is given down here that some of the basic thinking incorporated in this was done by Dr. Tiller, who I said was one of the men at the forefront of the scientists in looking at some of these new energies.
Dr. Meek, have you or any of your colleagues...
Excuse me, sir, I am not a doctor. I'm an engineering graduate. I did back in 50 years ago, so I'm going out to attend my 50th reunion shortly. But back in those days, the doctor's degree was not the sine qua non for being a professional success.
Has any of you ever been approached by any intelligence agencies?
Sorry, but...
Have any intelligence agencies either here or ever approached any of you?
No, we have not been approached by any intelligence agencies in this country or abroad. Some of our colleagues in Germany and in England told me on my recent trip to Germany and England that there had been in recent months some approaches to some of those researchers by intelligence agents. That's the only thing that I know about subject. Yes, sir.
Excuse me. You indicated that apparently Dr. Mueller has progressed in his consciousness or his learning since leaving this life. Do you conclude from that and other research you've done that progression is eternal? And is there a point at which that progression is stopped, perhaps because of things we have done in this life?
There is no practical limit. Literally, the sky is the limit. And again, without getting over into theological or esoteric philosophy, I just want to say that apparently growth and progression is unlimited. We spoke over here, there's an arrow that touches on that subject, the purpose of life, continuing mental, emotional, and spiritual growth. And as far as we know, there is no limit. That, again, I don't want to get into the religious part of it, but if you or any of us want to keep on growing, we can evolve to a point of being God-like ourselves.